who died in the war against Nazism, to the millions of people, including children, who died in Hitler's and collaborators' concentration camps, who were enemies of the humanity and in their ghettos. For Russia, as the successor of the USSR, I'll remind you that the USSR lost tens of millions of citizens in that war. It is a special day. For this reason, the International Union of Former Juvenile Prisoners of Fascism, together with the Russian Union of Former Juvenile Prisoners of Fascism, other Russian social patriotic organizations, starting from 2020, the year of the 75th anniversary of the Great Victory, annually coincide with the International Day of Remembrance of Victims of Fascism International Fascist Forum. This year, the forum will be held on September 12th and 13th. The participants will lay wreaths and flowers at the Memorial Tragedy of Nations on Poklonny Hill. Speeches will be made by heads of veteran and youth organizations, federal executive authorities, specialized committees of the State Duma and the Federation Council, as well as representatives of religious denominations, diplomatic missions of foreign states, heroes of the Soviet Union and Russia, and many others. The purpose of the forum, held under the motto, "Remembering the past, thinking about the future," is to warn the world about the real threat of fascism, which mankind once again has to face. This is the transformation of Ukraine into an anti-Russia, the banning of the Russian language in schools there, the persecution of orthodoxy, the blurred and modern manifestations of fascism in different countries will be presented, as well as the topics of falsification of the history of World War II and the Great Patriotic War. Legal assistance to victims of fascism, patriotic education of the younger generation will be touched upon. Representatives of Armenia, Belarus, Kazakhstan, Latvia, Lithuania, Moldova, Uzbekistan, Estonia, Serbia, Bulgaria, Germany, France, Austria, Slovenia, Israel, Poland, USA, and a number of other countries will join the forum in the form of video conference. Sergei Lavrov will address the forum participants with a welcoming speech. Today, 78 years after the victory over fascism, it is more important than ever to remember the escalation of contempt and other practices that contribute to the escalation of contempt submitted annually by the Russian Federation and other co-sponsors is aimed at preserving the historical truth about the Second World War and its outcome. I'm ready to answer any of your questions.
Good afternoon, Maria Vladimirovna. Recently, the Nobel Foundation has changed its mind about inviting the ambassadors of Russia, Belarus, and Iran to the year's award ceremony in Stockholm. The earlier discussion to invite diplomatic representatives was explained by belief in the importance and appropriateness of disseminating as widely as possible the values and messages that the Nobel Prize stands for. Could you comment on this fickleness of the Nobel Committee? We believe that it equals to a joke. Maybe if we are told something like that 10 years ago, we would say that responsible people cannot act like that. The people who have authority, who have their own functions, not engaged in their business, but they are having their work and their functions to implement. That is the oldest foundation and the prize. I would like to say that is a tragic comedy that has taken place. On the 31st of August, there is a press release of the Nobel Foundation announcing the return to the more than century-old practice of inviting the ambassadors of all diplomatic missions to the Nobel Prize ceremony in Stockholm. Commenting on this decision, can say that such things happen like misprints, like unagreed documents published, hacker attacks. It can happen, but no. This was a tax that was agreed within the Nobel Foundation. And in support of this decision, and in order to make it look very important, Vidal Helgensen, the executive director of the foundation, commented on the decision, saying that it was aimed at counteracting the polarization tendency in the world when the opportunities for dialogue between those who hold different views are severely limited. End of quote. It's his words. So they made a decision that they would invite the ambassadors from all countries in order to prevent and to overcome the polarization in the world and to join efforts and to have a constructive way. Because everything that they had over this period, over a year and a half, it didn't work. This sensational announcement in the Western world, it's exceptional in the West because the global South lives on these principles. The division of the political concepts and cultural concepts. So this is sensational only within the Western culture, Western community. So it headed active debate in the pro-Ukrainian political circles in Sweden and spurred another attack of Russophobia among representatives of the Swedish media. I would like to recall that one of the Nobel Prize sectors is Peace Nobel Prize. And the understanding or the experience that the foundation had could be meant for the Peace Nobel Prize, but it didn't happen like that. Succumbing to public pressure from the side of the Russophobes and the Kiev supporters, maybe fearing that they will be cancelled as well, the Nobel Foundation preferred to change its shoes in the air and to withdraw the invitations. I don't know whether they changed their press release. Maybe they had something different published. Of course, it's cowardice, it's fickleness, and their failure to defend their own positions, and also the absence of any standards on principled issues. So, unfortunately, the Nobel Foundation wanted to do a good thing, but just set questions over its justice and appropriate ways and approaches. And due to many data from the archives, we got to know how the how the Western special services were intriguing about the Nobel Prize winners. But now we don't have to reveal any secret materials. We have everything happening in our eyes. Another question, how would you comment on the attack on a mosque in the Cypriot city of Limassol in the night of August 25th? Because we've seen such news, the incident when an unknown person threw Molotov cocktails into the building of the mosque. The building was damaged and there was no casualties. We believe that such behavior, socially dangerous ones, is not acceptable. And it must each time be subject of the most thorough investigation by the law enforcement agencies. And the competent authorities, apart from punishment, should prevent such barbaric acts. When the attack was against a religious facility, and apart from the insulting of people's feelings, religious believers' feelings, they provoke interreligious discourse and tensions in society. Given the specific nature of the Cypriot state, the more urgent is the task of preserving interconfessional balance, preventing escalation, which can be abused by forces interested in shaking up the situation, dividing the islanders among themselves, and undermining the prospect of a Cyprus settlement. We are aware that attacks on religious sites are the hallmark of terrorist circles of all stripes, and we see the happenings in Ukraine, which we see in the women's monastery and in Lavra, Kievo-Pechorskaya Lavra. And there are also sites that are not so important and not so familiar to the international community that are still very significant for the believers that are being destroyed literally, and the persons are being persecuted, and there are many such cases. We believe that the fight against this practice should be among the conditional priorities of truly civilized countries. I would like Nicosia to hear us. It is impossible to have dividing lines between your country and other countries, saying that such crimes regarding this religious side can be punished and denounced, and then if we speak about other countries, then we would deem and regard the political situation. No, these questions are fundamental, principled. We should not invent anything. Should not go to the negotiation table and to work upon the new approaches. We already have them. As for the reaction of Nicosia regarding this terrorist attack, the same reaction should come regarding the desecration of the religious sites all over the world, and only by joining our efforts we can say no to the terrorists and extremists who practice such conduct. No matter whether it is a mosque, a Catholic church, or Orthodox cathedral, whether it is in Kiev, in Nicosia, in Middle East, in Northern America, or whatever, it doesn't matter. It is a basic principle that should be used when we speak about such cases, about such crimes. So thank you very much. Moving forward, whether Sputnik is with us. Yes, we are with you. Good afternoon, Radio Sputnik. We have two questions. The first one about the new architecture of security in the European continent. It was announced by Catherine Colonna, Catherine Colonna announced a new security architecture, and he said that it was impossible to construct a new architecture without Russia. What would be the basis of a new architecture, and what conditions can be created for it? And maybe she's not sincere, because she is speaking about the joining of Ukraine to NATO, and she's for the supporting the Kiev regime and for weapon supplies to Ukraine. And whether I would like to ask whether the ministries of foreign affairs of your countries are actively having active contacts. Due to the position of Paris and due to the activities against our country, the sanctions against Russia, and also the weapon supplies, due to which our civilians are killed. Of course, passing to the Catherine Colonna's announcement, we've seen these pronouncements, and she said that we need to construct the architecture of security in European continent, taking into account all the parties' interests. Maybe this is just a phrase, a political science routine invented by experts. Maybe it can be otherwise. We do not know anything about any formal proposals of Paris regarding this topic. She said that this security should be protected, taking into account the interests of all the parties. And during a long time, we already said that we are the part of the European continent. Now we can say that we are fundamental part, the basic part of the European continent, but not the EU. Our former partners unilaterally withdrawn all of the bilateral mechanisms of cooperation, like discussing global and regional issues, including the newly convened working group on strategic stability and European security at the level of leadership of the foreign and defense ministers of Russia and France. So they blocked it themselves. To discuss it like they do in Paris, it is pointless due to the Paris role in prolonging the conflict in Ukraine. We speak about the weapon supplies and also the assistance to the Kiev regime. Now about the principled approaches, we believe that any discussion should be based on taking into account the mutual interests of those of the contracting parties have an agreement. And a matter of fact, we repeatedly said that before the launch of the special military operation. I would like to say that 6 months before the start of the special military operation in 2021, this was the time that was devoted to attempts to be made heard by Washington, by Paris. And we wanted to say that there was no European security due to the active phase of the conflict in Ukraine since 2014. And since the European Union was a part of the conflict and was undermining the security in the European continent. So these were not the rules that were unheard by anyone, but we put this all on paper and was sent to the capitals of European countries, and our high-level diplomats were sent to explain our position and our approaches. I would like to remind you what was the result. It was 0 result. And was the relentless approach of NATO and its military infrastructure to our borders, the West's desire to turn Ukraine to an anti-Russian NATO stronghold, and the complete disregard for Russia's strategic security interests that were the main reasons that compelled us, after many years of repeated attempts to reach compromises, to meet halfway. This made us take decisive measures. The closer the military structure of NATO countries comes to our borders, the more actively they pump weapons into Ukraine, the more obvious becomes the lack of real intentions of the West, of Paris, to move towards a new security architecture, as they say, based on the principle of its indivisibility. I would like to remind you that all these principles were documented. Thank you. Another question regarding Moldova. Moldovan President Maia Sandu, in an interview with CNN, accused Russia of attempts to overthrow the government, undermine democratic processes, and preliminarily held Russia responsible for interfering in this year's local and presidential elections in Moldova. How would you comment on such accusations? This is a timely announcement of Maya Sandu. She formulated quite well the problems that are on the agenda in modern Moldavia. The overthrowing the government, undermining democratic processes, and interfering in the elections. Yes, it is said very correctly. But she accused not the right side. She is to blame, and her own team, because that the West is behind them, and the people that were introduced into the political life of Moldavia, they have passports of our countries, and they defend the interests of other countries rather than Moldova. And the problems were quite well formulated by Sandu. And we can say that undermining the democratic processes and interfering in the elections is all about her. So it is the West is inept to work according to their well-tried scheme, and this hostage is the people of Moldova. So it once again tried to shift the responsibility for the inability to work efficiently, and to say that Moscow is to blame for the deplorable state of diplomatic contacts between our countries. It is not right. What we have in reality, the authorities of Moldova, they are undermining the status of the sovereignty of the country, drive it into debt, and also join illegal sanctions mechanisms and actively impose neoliberal values alien to Moldovans, including the LGBT agenda. Under the false slogans of the struggle for human rights, freedom and democracy, the political and civilizational expansion of the West into Moldova is taking place. And the result of this is quite obvious. We are convinced that Moldovan people see and remember what the attempts of the United States of America and its satellites to bring civilization lead to: armed aggression, coup d'etat, destruction of statehood, barbaric plundering of resources. Such criminal acts are hidden behind the rhetoric about the so-called values on which Chisinau holds today. That is why Moldovans, despite the total censorship and complete ban on pluralism of opinions, do not believe the stories about Russia's guilt in all the troubles of the country, concocted according to the Western methodologies. So we can say that where the embassies of the United States is involved, where the West supports democracy, there they speak about Russian guilt. According to the latest opinion polls, almost 2/3 of the country's population, it's about 60%, 57.8%, expressed the belief that the republic is moving in the wrong direction. I would like to say that it is a wrong belief if the media of the Russia Federation would work there, but it is not so. They are all closed.
These are all mass media that Maya Sandu allowed them to watch and draw their own conclusions. This is a clear example of the Moldovans' attitude to the expressions of others. Moving on, is the Kommersant newspaper with us? Good afternoon, Madam Zakharova. British media are talking about the U.S. ability to bring back the arms due to the lowering of the nuclear threat. How would Russia approach such a decision? You know, this will be considered as an escalation step, which is leading to counteracting of withdrawal of arms from Europe. And here they're deployed as part of NATO's so-called joint nuclear missions. Because as you know, they don't have any equal rights-based access. Not a single NATO country has access to it. They're not allowed to make any decisions of its usage or any nuclear objects in their territory. They have no idea what is happening to these objects. These destabilizing practices blatantly anti-Russian in nature, as it provides for joint planning and regular training exercises of operational nuclear strikes by members of the hostile North Atlantic Bloc against targets in Russia from the territory of non-nuclear European countries. And I hear a lot from mass media that in Russia, in Moscow, our mass media mentions a lot about nuclear threats. And I have no idea what exactly is mentioning these nuclear threats. And I have no idea who's working out these threats. No one has mentioned that. And everything about this subject is mentioned in our doctrinal documents. And it's not even about the freedom of speech. This media is mentioning not through their politicians, their experts, their political experts. They're mentioning it when taking decisions on taking strikes and when working on Russia as a target during their training. It's not just words. It's not just possibilities that they declare for future scenarios. This is exactly training for future practices. And over the years, we have consistently stated that this generates strategic risks and undermines regional security and stability. However, NATO has chosen to ignore our urgent calls to eliminate this negative factor. Moreover, they declare themselves a nuclear alliance. In the context of the transition of the United States and NATO to an openly confrontational course to inflict a strategic defeat on Russia, this practice and its development compel us to take compensatory countermeasures designed to reliably protect the security interests of our country and its allies. We will continue to demand the return of all U.S. nuclear weapons to U.S. territory, followed by the destruction of the infrastructure that allows for their prompt deployment in Europe. The fact that the relevant storage facilities, not dismantled earlier in the United Kingdom, will soon be ready to receive U.S. nuclear bombs again is a visible confirmation of the validity of Russia's consistent position. Moving on. Is the CGTN, the Media Corporation of China, with us here today? Yes. Good afternoon, Madam Zakharova. Reuters colleagues today stated that the U.S. in the new package of help will pass over packages with a depleted uranium that are also ready to be stationed in the next days. Meanwhile, there's information that radiation contamination of the soil is already recorded around the Ukrainian warehouse where such ammunition is located. What is your assessment of such actions by the USA? We have commented on the subject of supplies of depleted uranium shells to Ukraine on a number of occasions and have drawn the attention of Western countries to this problem at various levels in international forums. The use of these shells by the Kiev regime is leading to increased suffering among the civilian population, including from the contamination of the area with hazardous substances. And not just of those who fall victims to it, but also of those who are using it and of future generations who will be there. The negative consequences of the use of depleted uranium munitions have been described in a number of international reports, and this fact is well known to everyone. And it's not just a question that is currently on the agenda between scientists, experts. These are already the answers that have been given by the scientists, by the experts, to such questions. Unfortunately, this threat about which Russia has repeatedly warned everyone is becoming real. And British and American depleted uranium munitions are turning Ukrainian soil into life-threatening territory. When mentioning grain, all Western media continuously mentions the grain deal. Should we renew it? How it's necessary for the agricultural security. We need to do anything. Take any measures against Russia, but what kind of grain are we talking about? What will we support? Grain that has been fed with depleted uranium. Now I understand why Germany's foreign minister called that grain cocaine, because it's not grain anymore. It's a mutated product, and no one mentions that. Why does no one mention that? All military facilities, equipment and ammunition transferred to the Kiev regime is a legitimate target, and every destroyed tank or warehouse with ammunition of this type is not only a potential outbreak of oncology in the population, but also dead, poisoned land that poses a deadly danger to all living things. Just remember Yugoslavia. You're representing the mass media of China. China knows all too well the consequences of NATO's aggression on Yugoslavia. Because Chinese diplomats died in that attack, they became the target of the NATO shellings, of illegal, horrendous attack, and the catastrophic consequences of the use and destruction of such munition, which were placed, among others, in a warehouse in Khmelnytsky, were recorded by the Europeans themselves in the spring of this year. They even presented